Good evening from the Capitol building in Charleston. I'm Suzanne Higgins. On the Legislature today, a look at the 2020 session through the lens of civil rights and social justice on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We'll speak with longtime community activist Reverend Matthew J. Watts in just a moment. But first, senior reporter Dave Mistich and reporter Emily Allen join me for the news update this evening. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks.
Emily, let's begin with you. In the House, the Judiciary Committee started to discuss the Senate Bill 94 that it has just received. The bill would allow people with certain disabilities to vote electronically through a phone app. Tell us more.
Yeah, so this is actually something that the Secretary of State's office kind of introduced during interims, and they seemed a little in a rush. According to General Counsel Donald Kersey to the Secretary of State's office, they proposed it after finding out about some lawsuits that are going on across the nation, in Ohio and Maryland most nearby. So here's kind of the issue. Right now in West Virginia, people with disabilities they can vote absentee ballot, the actual mail-in ballot, or actually at the physical polling place. Most are supposed to be ADA compliant. But for people with certain visual disabilities or something to do with their hands, they need assistance to help them vote. And that is a violation, according to the Secretary of State's office and all of these lawsuits. It's a violation of their constitutional right to vote privately. So the Secretary of State's office thinks, and various other, groups and advocacy groups, that with an app, that would allow them to vote more independently. And so this bill really, if it were enacted now, Kersey General Counsel was telling them that, they could proactively kind of avoid a lawsuit. And in this next clip that we're about to see, right now, he kind of elaborates on that.
I can say that without the ability of a county to transmit a ballot electronically to a voter who can't mark their ballot without assistance, the law is contrary to the Constitution. So either we prescribe the method that the counties can do this under, or we let a federal court do it for us much closer to the election.
So like I said, it's really a proactive effort to avoid a lawsuit. And while the Secretary of State's office here in West Virginia is concerned about the legal issues and how counties are going to implement this new technology before the 2020 election, huge election security concerns came out, which is something that Dave has actually addressed.
Exactly, Dave. You've done a lot of reporting in the past on the mobile voting pilot for military absentee voting, as well as the election security issue. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So, this all goes back to 2018. Secretary of State Mac Warner, he launched this pilot program for military absentee voters. It was through this app called Votes. So basically, military personnel would have the ability, if they were overseas, to cast a ballot using their smartphone. In the primary election, only 2 counties used it. It was Harrison and Monongalia. 24 counties signed on for the general. And in the end, only 144 voters from 21 counties wound up using this app in the general election. So a very small number. I should say that Tusk Philanthropies is this group that's been giving money to the Secretary of State's office to counties, or giving money to counties to implement this app. They paid for a study through the University of Chicago that basically concluded that it increased voter participation for the population involved in the pilot.
And we should add that Tusk Montgomery, the Philanthropies, they are the one that, according to General Counsel Donald Kersey, is going to pay for this in the 2020 election for people with disabilities. So, according to that, there will be no cost to counties, no cost to the state.
Right. And this is the key part of all of this, is that every election security expert that I've spoke to on this issue basically says that any internet-facing voting system, they've cautioned, warned against using these types of systems because of the possibility of being hacked. So if you go talk to any election security expert anywhere in the country, they're going to say if it connects to the internet, either by phone or by computer, be very, very, very careful, and they actually go as far as to recommend not using it. So.
All right, that was happening in the House side and Judiciary. Tell us something about what was going on the Senate side, Dave.
Sure. So there's 3 bills that passed over here in the upper chamber today. I'm going to explain one really quickly. Senate Bill 16, which is creating the Protect Our Right to Unite Act. Bill would essentially protect membership lists and donations to 501c designated nonprofits from public disclosure, other than specific instances involving campaign finance, lobbying, laws, on the books about that. So a group like the NAACP or the NRA, AFL-CIO, or the Friends of West Virginia Public Broadcasting, for that matter, or any other 501c wouldn't have to give this information out unless it dealt with electioneering or lobbying laws. It's one of those bills that has support from Americans for Prosperity, the ACLU, leaders of unions say they support this bill. But I should point out that, since these groups are not government agencies, they would already not be subject to disclosure. So again, we're sort of codifying something that wouldn't be subject to disclosure in the first place. Bill passed out of the Senate with a 34-0 vote, now heads the House.
All right, over in the House again, there was a news conference on rising costs of prescription drugs. I know you attended.
More so insulin. So it was hosted kind of by Delegate Barbara Fleischauer, a Democrat, and Delegate Jordan Hill, a Republican. And they are planning to, co-sponsor together a bill that would put caps on rising insulin costs in West Virginia. So they talked about that at the conference. Fleischauer actually had like a traveling caravan, bring people to Canada a few months ago to, get lower priced insulin there. And she had people from that trip at this conference. There were a lot of parents, though. Mothers who are diabetic or mothers who have children who are diabetic, very young children, teenagers. And they talked a bit about, kind of how they've noticed these costs have risen. One mother from Cabell County mentioned that her copay for her and her son, both type 1 diabetics, is like $850 a month. Someone else mentioned that without federal assistance through the CHIP program, Child Health Insurance Program, in 2017, their insulin would have costed more than $1,000. So this next clip, we're going to hear from Braxton, who's a Kanawha County teen. He's been diabetic for a few years, and he was one of the people that called for these caps.
My name is Braxton Smith. I've been a diabetic for over 4 years. These insulin prices are just getting out of hand. They are getting ridiculous. We need to put a cap on them. Because in 5 years, I'll be 18, out living on my own. Who knows how much money I'll have.
So nationally, there has been kind of a move to hold these insulin manufacturers accountable. Actually, recently, Colorado's legislature passed a very similar bill that would put a $100 cap on this. So there are several lawmakers that were present for this press conference today, including this lawmaker in this next clip. We're going to hear from Marion County.
So hearing these stories have really touched my heart, and we have to work to cap these out-of-pocket costs for insulin. So I want to thank Delegate Fleischauer for her leadership, for bringing this to all of our attention, and I can assure you that this is going to be a bipartisan effort. Republicans, Democrats alike, we're going to tackle this because you all should not be paying these kind of costs.
And Dave, yet another public hearing, another press conference today over in the House. Tell us about that.
Well, this is public hearing. Is the first of this session. Saw a couple big issues last year, like education reform and campus carry come up. This was about fire safety and building homes. This is a subject that wasn't really on my radar before today, but the long and short of it is there's this rules bundle, House Bill 4275. That would roll back a specific regulation on an electrical code. The way I understand it, there's this piece of equipment called an AFCI that helps prevent fires. Electricians and others at the public hearing cited statistic after statistic how that's true. But I understand that the Home Builders Association opposes the requirement, citing costs, and they say that there's no proof that this piece of equipment does prevent fires. Basically, this House bill would get the state on par with the National Electric Code, but would not require these AFCIs to be a part of the state fire code. It is on the amendment stage and will be up in the House tomorrow on second reading. So.
Okay, and one real quickly, the governor did have a press conference today with Delegate Daniel Linville. What was that about?
Sure. This is all a result of Delegate Linville calling attention to the reactivation of this employee suggestion award board. State employees have the opportunity to make suggestions that would save their agency money and get a cash award for doing so. For all adopted suggestions, the maximum award is limited to 20% of the first year's estimated savings, as established by the head of that unit, or $16,000. Today they passed out $4,400 between two state employees, and here's Delegate Linville at that press conference.
What this board has done over the past 2 or 3 months has been to save the state the amount that a state legislator makes every single year. And we're not done. We're going to keep meeting. We're going to keep doing this. And the thing I want to tell Governor, to all the members of state government is, we are going to keep doing this. And if you've got a good idea, we've put a bounty on it. I want to cut you a check for 20%. We want to come back here. We want to recognize you and to follow your careers.
Events throughout the state and country celebrating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. today. As Randy Yohe reports, here in Charleston, Dr. King's teachings continue to ring true with a diverse population.
Here, MLK Day always begins with a symbolic march to the Capitol following a church service. Before ringing the bell of freedom, people from all walks of life braved the cold, braved it with the warmth of Dr. King's spirit in their minds and hearts. This year's theme, the beloved community, the fierce urgency of now. So what is it that we need to be fiercely urgent about right now in 2020 when it comes to the teachings of Dr. King?
Poverty, fighting hunger. But another thing that I'd like to point out is that we have a lot of issues around race and lack of inclusion and diversity.
As America, we lost our dream. We're no longer the home and the refuge for the people who need a home. We're all immigrants unless we're Native Americans.
We're very divided at the top in D.C. We're also a little bit fractured in West Virginia. There's a lot of things that are on the table right now. I mean, you talk about IDD waiver. You talk about equal rights and housing for the LGBTQ community.
All of us as Americans treating each other with a dignity and respect that we should. And that has been lost, and we need to bring that back. So that's what I would hope for and pray for today.
When can a black person or a woman do something and not be accused of being, oh, well, you're black, you're a woman, just suck it up? I am tired of having to suck it up. You know, I believe we should have a right to express ourselves and to be treated as human beings.
This year, that bell ringing of freedom reminds those gathered here of the fierce urgency ahead. At the Capitol, I'm Randy Yohe for the Legislature Today.
Join us now, Reverend Matthew J. Watts, President and CEO of Hope Community Development Corporation here in Charleston. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
You are no stranger to the Capitol. You have been working toward and lobbying for reform here for many years. I'd like you just to speak to some of the comments that were made. Some of them were very grim, very pessimistic about the job we're doing with Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. For just in some opening remarks, how West Virginia is doing in terms of civil rights and social justice for all of its citizens.
You know, West Virginia is the least diverse state in the United States of America, and I think as a result of that, we may be somewhat insensitive to some of the challenges of the minority groups. There have been some progress made, but there's still a long ways to go, as evidenced by a report that was produced some years ago, the Select Committee on Minority Affairs report, which delineates some serious disparities and discrepancies in everything from education, employment, economic development, juvenile justice, over incarceration, adult criminal justice, et cetera. And as some of the people articulated, you know, in that piece there, that there are still some real concerns that everyone is not treated fairly and equitably. But I'd like to quote from Mr. Brian Stevenson. We must remain hopeful because hopelessness is indeed the enemy of justice. So despite the challenges, I'm still quite hopeful. Well, tell me briefly what the mission, the goal is of the Hope Community Development Corporation. Well, Hope City is an organization that I established about 24 years ago with the mission of trying to empower inner city residents, particularly on the west side of Charleston, through education, employment, economic development, safe, affordable housing, improving healthcare outcome for the citizens. The goal is to create a model that can be replicated around the rest of the country. And we think that we have some ideas that could be replicated, at least here in West Virginia, and maybe even beyond. So we continue to pursue that mission. And I want to get into some of those ideas as it relates to some of the specific reforms, but would you say your overarching focus is that achievement gap
that we see clearly between white children, white students, and black students?
Absolutely. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer in this country. Education determines employment opportunities, employment determines income, income determines standard of living, who will be in poverty or who will not be in poverty. And so we're looking at many years after the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education decision, which supposedly ended segregation, there's still a significant achievement gap between African American students and their white counterparts. And there's been a lot of talk about addressing it, but very little progress has been made in closing the achievement gap in West Virginia over the last 20 plus years that I've been paying attention to the issue.
This session, your big push has to do with education reform. It has to do with discipline and expulsion. And with some information that we have, West Virginia's African American students within our public schools have excessive discipline and expulsion rates when compared to other populations. We have a few graphics that are supplied by the West Virginia Department of Education. This first one illustrates how black students are referred for discipline issues and incidents more often than their peers of other races or ethnicities. We can look at the far right information is the most recent, 2018 to 2019, and you point out, Reverend Watts, that while the children, black children represent only 5% of our population, we can see there that they represent 38.2% of the disciplinary action.
Okay. If I can just kind of rephrase it a second, what this graph actually shows that 38.2% of all African American students were disciplined during that school year. And as you can see, significantly higher than the other students. So blacks are referred from discipline at a much higher rate than whites or any other ethnic group.
And so how do you interpret these statistics? What's happening?
Well, I think what's happening is that there's a built-in bias. It may not be intended against African American students. A built-in bias to where they are disciplined more harshly and more frequently. But it's not just in the public school system. That same bias has been found in the juvenile justice system. In 2005, Dr. Stephen Haas did a robust report and pointed out that black children are overrepresented at every stage of the juvenile justice process: arrest, detention, adjudication, incarceration, transfer to adult status than any other group. About 3 or 4 years ago, the United States Justice Department came to West Virginia and cited and threatened to sue West Virginia for the violation of the civil rights of kids with mental disabilities. And black youth are 4 times more likely to have their rights violated. So it's in the school, it's in the juvenile justice system, it's in mental health. Wherever there are black children, there seems to be a bias against them where they're treated more harshly. It may not be intended, but it seems to be baked into the system. And I did some research where I found reports over at the Culture Center. As early as 1976, there was a report done by the West Virginia State Human Rights Commission, and they highlight the fact that blacks were being over-disciplined excessively and disproportionately compared to white kids. Another report in 1980, and then a big report by the University of Pennsylvania in 2015. And so the data is there.
And there are studies that show that suspensions move kids closer to that to the corrections pipeline.
Yeah, it's called the schoolyard to prison yard pipeline. And there's a recent study done by Professor Thomas Moen, professor at Bowling State University, and some of his colleagues. And they said every suspension moves a child further and further down the schoolyard to prison line pipeline. And that's why it's so critical that it be addressed.
And so you're talking with lawmakers about this very information. What are you saying? What kind of feedback are you getting? What are the solutions to this?
As I said, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. We've gotten a very good response from Senator Patricia Rucker, the Senate Education Chair, as well as from the House Education Chair, Mr. Joe Ellington. When I showed them the data, they responded surprised initially, but said we certainly need to look into this. Senator Rucker has agreed that she's going to draft a piece of legislation that will require some oversight to this matter from the State School Superintendent's Office, as well as work with the local school superintendents to create a statewide awareness of the problem. And the reason this is important, Ms. Higgins, it's not just African American students, right? Low-income Caucasian students are being suspended at a very high rate. And since Caucasians make up 90% of the school population, right, of students in West Virginia, of the 270,000 students, about 240,000 are Caucasian. So what it's saying is it means that about 17,000 Caucasian students are suspended at least once per year. And so they're becoming a part of that schoolyard to prison yard pipeline. And that's why it's so important that this matter be addressed, as Dr. King said, with some sense of urgency.
You want us to get ahead of the problem. You want those wraparound services to be available and to address what we know as the barriers of education, those social determinants of health.
That is correct. You know, as wonderful as House Bill 206 was, it had a nice funding bill with some good policy initiative. What it does not do, it does not require that the achievement gap be addressed. It does not require that the suspension and expulsion disparity be addressed. It does not provide wraparound services in the evenings for students, the weekends, nor for the summers. And it doesn't address the 991 principle, and that is from birth to age 19, children spend 9% of their time at school and 91% somewhere other than school, and that's where they need support.
What other areas are you addressing? What other messages do you want to deliver to lawmakers?
We'd like to deliver to lawmakers that we really need in West Virginia to fund a robust summer employment opportunity for youth ages 14 to 18 who are still in school. Because of cuts in federal funding, there's very limited resources to fund jobs for youth during the summer. And we believe that summer work not only help them develop the work ethic, but also there could be academic enrichment and career awareness for many of these young people that have been suspended, that are behind academically, to try to help them make up some of that ground so that they're close to being on track with their literacy and numeracy and better prepared for graduation.
What about those graduation rates, high school for African American children, and their potential and readiness to go on to some kind of post-secondary training, college, community college?
That's an excellent question. Fortunately, we have made great strides in improving graduation rates for all races and ethnic groups in West Virginia. We have a pretty high graduation rate. But having said that, many of our students graduating from high school, African Americans and low-income Caucasians, have low literacy and numeracy rates. They're not prepared for employment, and high percentage of them are not prepared to do post-secondary education work. And so that's a great challenge, and that's why I believe we need summer academic enrichment and career awareness opportunities, because the children are graduating, but they're not prepared for work, not prepared for post-secondary education, and not prepared to be productive in the society.
Can you speak to what you have seen the impact has been of the drug epidemic in West Virginia on families, on newborns, on these grade school and high school children?
It's been devastating what the drug epidemic has done. Notwithstanding the recent opioid crisis, I happen to minister on the west side of Charleston, so it was ground zero in the late 80s and early 90s and 2000 for the crack cocaine epidemic. And we're still trying to recover from that. And on top of that, now the opioid epidemic has come. It certainly requires an all hands on deck. It requires us to have an incredible commitment to it, because in the end, West Virginia cannot be strong if we lose our children in the womb and in the cradle. And right now, a high percentage of children that are born in our birthing hospitals are born with substance abuse in their system. And it's affecting them for the rest of their lives. So it certainly demands our full attention, do all that we can to try to strengthen and stabilize families so that our children have better outcomes.
All right. Reverend Watts, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it very much. Tomorrow on the Legislature Today, we begin a two-night focus on West Virginia's major energy sectors. Oil and gas development tomorrow evening, and the forecast and challenges faced by the coal industry on Wednesday. Energy and environment reporter Brittany Patterson will bring us these reports and follow-up conversations. We hope you tune in. I'm Suzanne Higgins for everyone here at West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Thanks for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.
Viewers consistently report that they are more likely to use a service or